I had been working as a food delivery driver for a few months, and I had seen my fair share of strange things. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened one fateful night. It was close to midnight when I received an order for a small, out-of-the-way house at the end of a rarely used road. The address sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I shrugged it off and loaded the delivery, a simple burger and fries, into my car and set off. The roads were dark and empty, and the further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The houses became sparse, the streetlights fewer. Finally, I turned onto the narrow, winding road that led to the address. Trees loomed over the pavement, their branches casting eerie patterns in my headlights. As I approached the house, I noticed that it was in a state of disrepair. The paint was peeling, and the windows were covered with grime. A single dim light flickered on the porch. I parked the car and walked up the creaky wooden steps, feeling a growing sense of unease. I knocked on the door, and after a moment, it swung open slowly. An elderly woman stood there, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her hair was wild and unkempt, and she wore a tattered nightgown. "You've brought the food," she said in a hoarse whisper, her gaze darting around nervously. "Please, come in." I hesitated, but she stepped aside, making way for me. I entered the house, the air inside thick with a musty odor. The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior, dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture, and filled with an eerie silence. "Wait here," the woman instructed, pointing to a chair in the living room. I sat down, the seat sagging under my weight. She shuffled off into the kitchen, leaving me alone. As I waited, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. My eyes scanned the room, and I noticed a series of photographs on the mantelpiece. They depicted a family, a man, the elderly woman, and a young girl. But the photos were old, and the girl's expression in each picture was one of deep sorrow. Suddenly, I heard a soft thumping sound from upstairs. It was rhythmic, like footsteps pacing back and forth. I glanced toward the staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman returned, carrying an old, leather-bound book. "You need to read this," she said, her voice trembling. "It's important." Confused, I took the book and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and sketches, detailing strange rituals and symbols. My hands began to shake as I flipped through the pages, a sense of dread growing with each word. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman sat down across from me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "It's the only way to keep them away," she said, her voice cracking. "They come every night, and they won't leave us alone." "Who?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "The Watchers," she replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They come from the woods, and they watch us. They never leave, and they never speak. Just watch." I glanced back at the book, trying to make sense of the strange symbols and incantations. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I think they want her." She pointed to one of the photographs on the mantelpiece. The young girl. "My granddaughter," she said, her voice breaking. "She disappeared last year, and ever since then, they've been coming." As she spoke, the thumping sound from upstairs grew louder. I felt a surge of panic and glanced toward the staircase. The woman reached out and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You need to go," she said urgently. "Leave the food and go. Don't look back." I nodded, too frightened to argue. I placed the bag of food on the table and stood up, my legs trembling. As I made my way to the door, the thumping sound stopped abruptly. I paused, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, without warning, the front door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The woman was gone, and the living room was empty. I rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked from the outside. Panic set in as I looked around the dimly lit room. The only way out was through the back door. I hurried through the kitchen and reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut. Desperate to escape, I looked for another way out. The windows were all boarded up, and there was no way to break through the thick wooden planks. My only option was to find another exit upstairs. I took a deep breath and started up the creaky staircase, my heart racing with each step. The air grew colder as I ascended, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a faint whispering sound. I followed the sound down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The whispers grew louder, leading me to a closed door at the end of the hall. I hesitated for a moment before slowly pushing it open. Inside, the room was dark and cluttered with old furniture and boxes. In the center of the room, a small figure sat on the floor, hunched over. It was the young girl from the photographs. Her hair was matted, and her clothes were tattered. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, my voice trembling. The girl looked up, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "They won't let me go," she whispered. "They're always watching." I stepped closer, trying to comfort her. "Who are they?" I asked. She pointed to the window, and I followed her gaze. Outside, in the shadows of the trees, I saw them, the Watchers. Tall, thin figures with pale faces and dark, hollow eyes. They stood motionless, staring at the house. A surge of determination washed over me. I knew I had to get the girl out of there. I took her hand and helped her to her feet. "We're leaving," I said firmly. "We'll find a way out." We made our way back down the hallway, but as we reached the top of the stairs, the front door burst open. The elderly woman stood there, her eyes wild with fear. "You can't take her," she screamed. "They'll come for you too." I ignored her and hurried down the stairs, pulling the girl along with me. The woman lunged at us, but I managed to push her aside. We reached the front door and ran outside, the cold night air hitting us like a slap. The Watchers moved in unison, stepping out from the shadows and blocking our path. Their eyes were fixed on us, their expressions devoid of emotion. I felt a surge of panic, but I knew we couldn't stop. "Run!" I shouted to the girl, and we sprinted toward the woods, hoping to lose them in the trees. The Watchers followed, their movements eerily synchronized. No matter how fast we ran, they seemed to keep pace effortlessly. The girl stumbled, and I helped her up, my heart pounding with fear. We weaved through the trees, branches scratching at our skin. The Watchers were relentless, never losing sight of us. I knew we couldn't keep running forever, and I desperately searched for a place to hide. Finally, we reached a small clearing with an old abandoned shed. I pushed the girl inside and followed, slamming the door behind us. We were both gasping for breath, our hearts racing. The shed was dark and musty, filled with old tools and debris. We crouched in the corner, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear the Watchers outside, their footsteps crunching on the leaves. The girl clung to me, her small body trembling with fear. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They never stop." I held her close, my mind racing for a plan. We couldn't stay hidden forever. We had to find a way to escape the forest and get help. As I looked around the shed, my eyes fell on an old, rusty toolbox. I carefully opened it and found a few tools that might be useful: a hammer, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I turned to the girl. "Stay here and stay quiet," I whispered. "I'll be right back." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. I slowly opened the shed door and peeked outside. The Watchers were still searching the area, their movements slow and deliberate. I quietly made my way around the shed, using the trees for cover. I needed to create a distraction to draw them away from the girl. I found a large rock and threw it as far as I could. It landed with a loud crash, and the Watchers immediately moved toward the sound. Taking advantage of the distraction, I hurried back to the shed and grabbed the girl. "Come on, now's our chance," I whispered. We ran through the trees, keeping as quiet as possible. The Watchers were still searching the area where the rock had landed, giving us a head start. We made our way toward the edge of the forest, my heart pounding with hope. After what felt like an eternity, we finally emerged from the trees and reached the road. I could see the faint glow of streetlights in the distance, a sign that we were getting closer to civilization. We kept running, not daring to look back. The Watchers were still behind us, but they were slowly falling behind. My legs burned with exhaustion, but I pushed on, knowing that we couldn't stop now. Finally, we reached the main road, and I saw a car approaching. I waved frantically, hoping the driver would stop. The car slowed down, and a man rolled down the window. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes wide with concern. "Please help us," I gasped. "We need to get away from here." The man opened the door, and we climbed in, panting and out of breath. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw the watchers standing at the edge of the forest, their eyes fixed on us. The man drove us to the nearest police station, where we told our story. The officers were skeptical at first, but they could see the fear in our eyes and the scratches on our skin. They sent a patrol to investigate the house and the forest. A few hours later, the officers returned with grim expressions. They had found the elderly woman in the house, but there was no sign of the watchers. The woman was taken into custody, and the girl was placed in protective care. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered after our escape. The watchers were still out there, and I knew they wouldn't stop. I had seen something that night, something beyond my understanding, and it haunted me. As the days passed, I tried to return to my normal life, but the memory of that night never left me. I couldn't deliver food at night anymore, the fear was too much. But I knew one thing for sure. I had saved that girl from whatever terrible fate awaited her in that house. The watchers were still out there, but I had faced them and lived to tell the tale. And that was something I would never forget.